The Georgia heat in late August was unforgiving, thick and heavy like a wet wool blanket pressing down on the city of Atlanta. But inside the sanctuary of First Shiloh Baptist Church, the air conditioning hummed a sterile, icy tune, freezing the sweat on the necks of the city's elite. They had all come to pay their respects to Arthur Hayes, a titan of Atlanta real estate, a self-made millionaire, a pillar of the black business community. To them, he was a legend. To Gloria, he was just Arthur, the man who, 40 years ago, had promised her the world while they shared a single plate of grits in a cramped apartment on the west side. Gloria sat in the front pew, enveloped in black silk, her spine stiff as an iron rod. At 65, she still possessed the regal, unyielding posture of a woman who had spent decades holding her world together with sheer force of will. Behind the veil of her wide-brimmed hat, her dark eyes missed nothing. She didn't weep. The tears had dried up during those long, agonizing nights, listening to the cancer hollow out her husband's chest. Today wasn't about mourning, it was about observation. She watched her family, the legacy Arthur had left behind. To her right sat her firstborn, Stephen. At 42, he was the newly minted acting CEO of Hayes Construction and Development. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the first mortgage she and Arthur had taken out. But the suit couldn't hide the tension vibrating beneath his skin. While the choir sang a soaring rendition of His Eye is on the Sparrow, Stephen's hand was buried in his pocket, his thumb frantically tapping the screen of a silenced phone. He was sweating, and Gloria knew it wasn't from the heat or the grief. It was the cold, clammy sweat of a man drowning in secrets. Stephen had always possessed Arthur's ambition, but lacked his father's moral compass. He looked the part of the grieving corporate heir, but his eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. Next to Stephen was his wife, Ashley. If grief was an accessory, Ashley wore it like a limited edition Birkin bag. She was clad in a skin-tight black designer dress that was more appropriate for a high-end cocktail lounge than a sanctuary. Every few minutes, she dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed lace handkerchief, ensuring her mascara remained flawless for the inevitable social media posts. Gloria watched as Ashley subtly angled her face toward the church's hired photographer, a practiced expression of aristocratic sorrow plastered on her perfectly contoured face. Ashley didn't mourn Arthur. She mourned the temporary pause in her social calendar. She was a social climber who had mistaken her husband's last name for her own personal ATM. On Gloria's left sat Daniel, her youngest, 38 years old and crumbling right before her eyes. Daniel couldn't stay still. His knee bounced in a frantic, syncopated rhythm against the wooden pew. He kept sniffing, aggressively rubbing his nose, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Midway through the eulogy delivered by the mayor himself, Daniel mumbled an excuse about needing the restroom and slipped out through the side aisle. He didn't return for 20 minutes. When he did, the bouncing stopped, replaced by an eerie, lethargic stillness. Gloria's heart ached with a familiar, heavy sorrow. Daniel had always been the sensitive one, the artist, but the pressure of the Hayes name had cracked him. Now he was self-medicating his way into an early grave, and the vultures of Atlanta's underworld were circling him. As the casket was finally wheeled down the aisle, the congregation stood in reverent silence. Gloria placed a gloved hand on the polished mahogany wood. "Rest now, my love," she thought, her internal voice steady. "The battle is over for you, but for me, I have a feeling it's just beginning." She knew her sons. She knew the greed that had slowly infected their blood over the years, a sickness of privilege that she and Arthur had somehow failed to inoculate them against. Arthur had sensed it too, in his final months. He had spent hours in his study, making hushed phone calls, reviewing documents until his eyes bled, shutting the door even to her. As they walked out into the blinding Atlanta sun, surrounded by a sea of false sympathy and calculating handshakes, Gloria felt a profound shift. The patriarch was gone. The masks were starting to slip. 3 days later, the air in the downtown offices of Sterling, Vance and Associates was just as sterile as the church, though it smelled faintly of lemon polish and old leather. Richard Sterling, a white-haired corporate attorney with a demeanor as dry as sandpaper, sat behind a massive oak desk. He was the kind of lawyer who spoke in billing increments and viewed human emotion as a minor inconvenience to legal proceedings. Gloria sat in a high-backed leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Stephen sat opposite her, his posture relaxed, an air of entitled anticipation radiating from him. Daniel slumped in his chair, hiding behind dark designer sunglasses despite the dim lighting of the room. Ashley sat perched on the arm of Stephen's chair, her manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm against the wood. "Thank you all for coming," Richard Sterling began, adjusting his reading glasses. "Arthur was a formidable man, and his estate is extensive. We are here to read his final will and testament, updated just 3 months prior to his passing." Stephen leaned forward, a hungry gleam in his eye. "Let's get to it, Richard. The company needs leadership, and we need to stabilize the markets. Dad would want us to move quickly." Gloria didn't look at her son. She kept her gaze fixed on the gold pen resting on Richard's desk. "Always in a hurry to wear the crown, Stephen," she thought, "even before the king is cold in the ground." Richard cleared his throat and began reading. The legal jargon flowed over the room like a slow, muddy river. It was a tedious enumeration of Arthur's visible empire, the commercial real estate developments in Midtown, the residential tracts in Buckhead, the fleet of construction vehicles, the liquid assets in the primary corporate accounts. "To my eldest son, Stephen Arthur Hayes," Richard droned on, "I leave full operational control of Hayes Construction and Development, along with 40% of the commercial real estate portfolio." Stephen exhaled sharply, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. He squeezed Ashley's hand and she beamed, already mentally redecorating her country club locker room. "To my youngest son, Daniel Marcus Hayes," the lawyer continued, "I leave the remaining 60% of the commercial real estate portfolio, specifically the retail management division and the residential properties." Daniel nodded slowly, pushing his sunglasses up the bridge of his nose. To anyone else, it looked like a solemn acceptance. To Gloria, it looked like a man calculating how quickly he could liquidate a strip mall to pay off a cartel. The total value of the assets distributed between the two brothers hovered around $30 million. It was a staggering fortune, a kingdom cleanly divided between two princes. Richard Sterling paused. He closed the thick, leather-bound folder. The silence in the room stretched, taut and uncomfortable. "And for my mother?" Stephen finally asked, his tone laced with a forced, practiced concern. "Obviously the house in Ansley Park goes to her, but what about her share? Her allowance?" Richard sighed, an almost imperceptible sound of pity. He opened a small drawer in his desk and withdrew an object. It wasn't a pristine legal document. It wasn't a velvet box containing the deed to an island. It was a standard manila envelope. The edges were frayed, the paper yellowed with age, and a fine layer of dust clung to its surface, as if it had been wedged behind a filing cabinet for decades. Arthur's handwriting, spidery and weakened by his illness, was scrawled across the front. "For my Gloria." Richard slid the dusty envelope across the polished oak desk toward Gloria. "This is the entirety of the specific bequests left to Mrs. Hayes in this document. The primary residence is, of course, jointly owned and passes directly to her. But as for the corporate assets and liquid capital outlined in this will, Arthur explicitly instructed that this envelope be given to you, and nothing more." Stephen blinked. Ashley's jaw actually dropped for a fraction of a second before she snapped it shut. Daniel let out a low, confused whistle. Gloria looked down at the envelope. It looked like trash. It looked like an insult. 45 years of marriage. 45 years of ironing his shirts when he was just a foreman. 45 years of balancing the company ledgers at their kitchen table, hunting down unpaid invoices, feeding the crews out of her own pocket when times were lean. She had been the quiet engine driving the Hayes machine, and for all of it, she was handed a piece of garbage in a room full of millionaires. She reached out, her hand remarkably steady, and picked it up. It weighed practically nothing. The silence shattered as Ashley let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the leather-bound law books lining the walls. "Well, look at that," Ashley purred, her voice dripping with venom masked as southern charm. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. "A dusty little envelope. I guess you can use that to keep your recipe for that world-famous peach cobbler Gloria. Not like you'll need a bank account anymore." Gloria didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head to look at her daughter-in-law. Her eyes were deep, dark pools of absolute calm. "Ashley," Stephen warned, though his tone lacked any real reprimand. He turned to his mother, adopting a tone of condescending patience, the kind one might use with a confused toddler. "Mom, don't worry. Listen, Dad obviously wasn't thinking straight at the end. The medications. You know how it was. He probably thought he was protecting you from the stress of the business. Protecting me? Gloria repeated, her voice a quiet, resonant alto that demanded the air in the room. Exactly. Stephen smiled smoothly, showing teeth. You don't need to worry your head about numbers, taxes, or corporate liabilities. That's a young man's game now. Daniel and I have it under control. We'll make sure you get a nice monthly stipend. Hell, maybe it's time we start looking at some of those luxury assisted living communities. The ones with the golf carts and the water aerobics. You shouldn't be rattling around that big house in Ansley Park all by yourself anyway. Assisted living. The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat disguised as filial piety. He wasn't talking about caring for her. He was talking about containing her. He was talking about removing the last obstacle to his total dominion. Gloria looked at Daniel. And you, Danny? Do you agree with your brother? Am I ready to be put out to pasture? Daniel shrunk back into his chair, avoiding her gaze. I mean, Mom, Steve's right. The business is ruthless right now. You just rest. We'll handle the heavy lifting. He rubbed his nose aggressively again. Gloria looked at the three of them, her flesh and blood, and the viper they had let into the nest. They saw an old, invisible woman. They saw a relic of Arthur's past, someone to be managed, pitied, and eventually discarded. They had entirely forgotten who she was. They had forgotten the woman who had stood toe-to-toe with racist bank managers in the 1980s to secure their first business loan. They had forgotten the matriarch who had built the very foundation they were now greedily tearing apart. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. She recognized the dust. It wasn't just old dirt. It was drywall dust. The specific chalky white residue from the very first project Arthur had ever completed on his own. Arthur wasn't senile. Arthur wasn't insulting her. Arthur was sending her a message. Remember where we started, G. Gloria stood up. The movement was so graceful, so full of quiet authority that it forced Richard Sterling to sit up straighter in his chair. Mom? Stephen asked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his manicured features. Where are you going? We need to discuss the stipend. There is nothing left to discuss here, Stephen, Gloria said, her voice cutting through the room like a diamond blade. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying gravity. You have your inheritance. I have mine. She slipped the dusty envelope into her black leather handbag. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't demand fairness. A queen does not beg for crumbs in her own castle. Enjoy your kingdom, boys, Gloria said softly, looking directly into Stephen's eyes until he was forced to look away. Then she shifted her gaze to Ashley, freezing the smirk right off the younger woman's face. And Ashley, my peach cobbler recipe is a family secret. You haven't earned it. Without another word, Gloria turned and walked out of the office. Her heels clicked a steady, rhythmic beat against the hardwood floor, a sound of absolute resolve. As she stepped into the elevator and the heavy steel doors slid shut, separating her from the heirs to the Hayes empire, she finally allowed a small, dangerous smile to curve her lips. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried her along with Arthur. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside the dust. The house in Ansley Park was suffocatingly quiet. For 40 years, this sprawling Tudor estate had been filled with the chaotic symphony of a growing family. Arthur's booming laughter, the clinking of glasses during their legendary holiday parties, and the constant hum of a life well lived. Now, standing in the center of the pristine, marble-countered kitchen, Gloria heard nothing but the rhythmic, mocking tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She placed her black leather handbag on the counter. With slow, deliberate movements, she unclasped it and withdrew the dusty manila envelope. In the sterile, aggressively modern office of Richard Sterling, the envelope had looked like trash. Here, under the warm amber glow of the pendant lights she and Arthur had picked out together in Italy, it looked like a relic, a piece of their history. She ran her thumb over the drywall dust clinging to the paper. Arthur had kept this envelope in his workshop, the only place the maids were strictly forbidden to clean. It was a remnant from their very first independent contracting job, a modest duplex remodel on Auburn Avenue that had almost bankrupted them. Gloria broke the brittle seal. There was no sentimental letter inside, no poetry about eternal love. Arthur was a pragmatist. He showed his love through provision, not prose. Instead, 2 items slid out onto the cool marble. The first was a heavy antique brass key with a serial number stamped into the metal. The second was a thick textured business card. James Caldwell, Esquire, Caldwell and Associates, Trust, Estate, and Corporate Law, Buckhead, Atlanta, Georgia. Gloria stared at the card. A slow, knowing smile finally broke across her face. Richard Sterling was the lawyer Arthur used for the public face of his empire, the zoning boards, the standard contracts, the visible wealth. But James Caldwell? James was a Morehouse man, a brilliant legal predator who operated exclusively in the shadows of Atlanta's black elite. He was the man you called when you needed to build an invisible fortress around your money. Arthur hadn't left her with nothing. He had left her with a map. She picked up the landline, a habit she refused to break in the era of smartphones, and dialed the number on the card. It rang only twice before a polished voice answered. Caldwell and Associates. This is Gloria Hayes, she said, her voice steady. Tell Mr. Caldwell I have the key, and I am ready to open the door. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the sound of a heavy door closing. Then a deep, resonant baritone came through the receiver. Mrs. Hayes, I've been expecting your call. My schedule is entirely clear for you. Shall we say 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? I'll be there, James. The offices of Caldwell and Associates were a stark contrast to the stuffy old-world aesthetic of Sterling's firm. Located on the penthouse floor of a glass tower in Buckhead, the space was modern, sleek, and adorned with breathtaking original African-American art. It smelled of fresh espresso and quiet power. James Caldwell was waiting for her at the elevator banks. He was a tall man in his early 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, possessing the quiet confidence of a man who held the secrets of half the city's billionaires. Mrs. Hayes, he said, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. My deepest condolences. Arthur was a giant, and a true friend. Thank you, James, Gloria replied, gripping her handbag. But I suspect Arthur didn't send me to you for sympathy. James offered a small, sharp smile. No, ma'am, he certainly did not. Please come into my office. They sat across from each other at a massive live-edge walnut desk. James didn't offer her tea or water. He understood that Gloria was not a fragile widow in need of coddling. She was a woman on a mission. He slid a heavy steel lockbox across the desk. The brass key, if you please, James requested. Gloria handed it over. James unlocked the box, the mechanism engaging with a heavy, satisfying clack. Inside rested a stack of legal documents, bound in thick blue folders. Richard Sterling read the public will yesterday, James began, his hands resting on the folders. I assume he distributed the $30 million in operating assets to Stephen and Daniel, as instructed? Like pieces of a pie, Gloria said dryly. Stephen got the construction arm and half the commercial real estate. Daniel got the rest, and I got the dust. Let them have their pie, Mrs. Hayes, James said, his eyes gleaming. Because Arthur made sure you own the bakery. Gloria raised an eyebrow. Explain. James opened the first folder. The companies your sons inherited, Hayes Construction and Development and Hayes Properties, are not independent entities. Over the last 5 years, Arthur quietly restructured the entire corporate architecture. Those companies are now legally classified as subsidiary branches. They are wholly owned by a parent entity called Hayes Enterprise Holdings. James tapped the paper with his custom fountain pen. And Hayes Enterprise Holdings is controlled by a blind Delaware statutory trust, a trust designed to be impenetrable to audits, invisible to public records, and completely shielded from corporate liabilities. Gloria felt her pulse quicken. A Delaware trust, the ultimate financial ghost ship. Arthur transferred the bulk of his liquid wealth, the intellectual property, the heavy equipment patents, and the controlling shares of the holding company into this trust, James continued, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. Your sons believe they are the kings of their respective castles, but legally, they are merely high-paid employees of the Delaware Trust. They own the operational stress. The trust owns 51% of the voting power and the actual equity. Gloria leaned forward, looking at the signatures on the documents. Arthur's bold scrawl was there, alongside notary seals and state stamps. And who is the trustee, James? Who controls the Delaware Trust? James Caldwell slid a document across the desk, pointing to a single line at the bottom of the page. You are, Mrs. Hayes. James said softly. "You are the sole beneficiary, and you possess irrevocable, absolute power of attorney over the trust. In total, the assets within this trust bring your true inheritance to roughly $170 million. You don't just have a stipend, Gloria. You have the power to liquidate, restructure, or dissolve the very companies your sons think they inherited with a single signature." Gloria stared at her name on the paper. Gloria Estelle Hayes, sole trustee. For a moment, the room seemed to spin. $170 million. Absolute control. The sheer magnitude of Arthur's brilliant, silent maneuver washed over her. He had let the boys fight over the visible scraps while quietly handing his queen the keys to the entire kingdom. "Arthur knew," Gloria whispered, a fierce pride blooming in her chest. "He knew what they were becoming." "He did," James confirmed, his expression turning grim. "Which brings us to the second part of why you are here." James reached back into the steel box and pulled out a thick black leather binder. It didn't look like a legal document. It looked heavy, ugly, and ominous. "About 3 years ago, Arthur approached me with concerns," James said, pushing the binder toward her. He felt the culture of the company shifting. He saw Stephen buying properties he couldn't afford on his salary, and Daniel keeping strange hours, associating with unsavory characters. "Arthur asked me to retain a private investigator. We used Marcus Vance, retired Atlanta PD, specialized in financial forensics and vice." Gloria touched the cover of the binder. It felt cold. "Tell me what's in it, James. Don't sugarcoat it." "Stephen first," James sighed, opening the binder to a section marked with a red tab. "Stephen isn't in debt to bookies or the mob, Gloria. It's worse. He's in debt to predatory vulture capital, specifically a shadowy hedge fund called Apex Capital Partners." James flipped through pages of bank statements and wire transfers. "To fund Ashley's relentless social climbing, the country club memberships, the private jets, the Aspen chalets, Stephen has been quietly leveraging the equipment and assets of the construction subsidiary. He took out unregulated mezzanine loans. He currently owes Apex over $5 million, and the interest is compounding daily. If he misses a payment, Apex has the right to seize the construction company's assets. He is quite literally one bad month away from bankrupting the legacy Arthur built." Gloria closed her eyes. Her brilliant, ambitious firstborn. He had sold his father's blood and sweat to buy his wife a front-row seat to the Atlanta elite. "And Daniel?" she asked, her voice tight. James hesitated, turning to a section marked with a black tab. He slid a stack of surveillance photographs across the desk. "Daniel's situation is more dangerous. He manages the commercial real estate, specifically the strip malls and the lower-tier residential units on the south side. He's been bleeding cash to fund a severe narcotic addiction." Gloria looked at the photos. They showed Daniel, gaunt and sweating, handing envelopes to heavily tattooed men in the parking lots of their own properties. "To pay for his habit," James explained gently, "Daniel allowed an Atlanta-based cartel to lease out 3 of your commercial storefronts. They run cash-only businesses, a laundromat, a nail salon, a tire shop. But the books are cooked. Daniel is using Hayes Properties to launder their drug money. He's in so deep, Gloria, he couldn't get out if he wanted to. If the feds catch on, they will seize the properties under RICO laws. If he stops laundering the money, the cartel will kill him." The silence in the office was deafening. The ticking clock in Gloria's mind had stopped. Her boys, her beautiful, privileged boys, whom she had rocked to sleep, whom she had bandaged and tutored and prayed over, were dismantling their lives piece by piece. One out of greed, the other out of despair. James watched her carefully. He had delivered devastating news to clients before. He expected the tears, the denial, the collapse. He reached toward the silver carafe on his desk. "Mrs. Hayes, please let me pour you some water. I know this is a profound shock." "I don't need water, James," Gloria said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was as hard and smooth as polished obsidian. She didn't look like a woman who had just had her world shattered. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield. Slowly, Gloria opened her black leather handbag again. She bypassed her reading glasses and her wallet, reaching deep into the lining. She pulled out a worn, black-and-white, marbled composition notebook. The edges were frayed, and the spine was reinforced with a strip of clear tape. She placed the notebook gently on top of the private investigator's billion-dollar leather binder. James frowned, his hand hovering over the water carafe. "What is that, Gloria?" "You and Richard Sterling handle the high-level corporate law," Gloria said, flipping the notebook open. The pages were filled with meticulously handwritten columns of numbers, dates, and cross-references, written in neat, unwavering cursive. But before Arthur could afford fancy lawyers or forensic accountants, he had me. I balanced the books of Hayes Construction for the first 20 years at our kitchen table. She turned the book around so James could see the pages. 3.5 years ago, Stephen took over the primary procurement accounts, Gloria explained, her finger tracing a line of red ink. A few months later, I noticed a discrepancy in the bulk material orders for the Midtown project. Just a fraction of a percent. A slight overbilling on steel that didn't match the supplier's standard invoice rate. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But I know the price of steel in Georgia, James. I've been tracking it since 1982. James Caldwell's eyes widened in genuine shock as he looked at the handwritten ledger. It was a flawless forensic audit, done entirely by hand. I traced the phantom invoices, Gloria continued smoothly. I found the shell company Stephen had set up in the Cayman Islands. He was siphoning funds to pay for that ridiculous yacht Ashley just had to have for her 35th birthday. You knew? James stammered, his professional composure cracking for the first time. Did you tell Arthur? Gloria looked up, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, brilliant light. Tell him? James, who do you think told Arthur to hire you? Who do you think suggested the Delaware Trust? The realization hit the lawyer like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the 65-year-old woman sitting across from him, as if seeing her for the first time. Arthur hadn't built this trap alone to protect a naive, grieving widow. This was a joint operation. Arthur was the visionary, James, Gloria said softly, closing the notebook and resting her hands on top of it. But I have always been the architect of his reality. When I brought this to him, it broke his heart. But we agreed. If we just confronted Stephen and Daniel, they would lie, they would hide it deeper, and eventually, the poison would kill the company, and them along with it. She looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sprawling, glittering canopy of Atlanta. We knew Arthur's time was short. We knew that once he was gone, their true nature would surface entirely, Gloria said, turning her gaze back to the lawyer. We decided to let them believe they had won. We needed to see how far they would go when they thought no one was watching. The dusty envelope. That was my idea, a final test. If they had shown me an ounce of respect, a shred of the love a mother deserves, I would have intervened gently. She thought of Stephen's condescending smile. She thought of Ashley's mocking laugh. She thought of Daniel's cowardly silence while they discussed putting her in a home. But they failed the test, Gloria stated, her tone devoid of pity. They looked at the woman who gave them life, who built their throne, and they saw a nuisance. They thought they buried me, James. They didn't realize they just handed me the shovel. Gloria stood up, smoothing the skirt of her black dress. She slipped the Delaware Trust documents and the private investigator's binder into her large tote bag, right next to her composition notebook. Draft the necessary documents to activate my power of attorney over Hayes Enterprise Holdings, Gloria commanded, her posture impeccable. We are going to let them play their game a little while longer. Let them get comfortable. Because when I drop the hammer on my boys, James, I am not just going to take away their money. She looked back at the lawyer, the matriarch in full, terrifying command. I am going to take away their pride. The pressure on Stephen Hayes was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a physical weight compressing his chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office at Hayes Construction, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. But he wasn't seeing the buildings. He was seeing the text message that had just vibrated on his secure secondary phone. Apex Capital, 48 hours until default protocol initiates. The $5 million balloon payment is non-negotiable. Liquidation of equipment fleet will commence Monday. He wiped a sheen of cold sweat from his forehead. If Apex seized the heavy machinery, the company would default on 3 major city contracts by Tuesday. The Hayes legacy would be publicly humiliated, and the resulting breach of contract lawsuits would bankrupt him entirely. Ashley lounged on the white leather sofa across the room, idly scrolling through her social media feed. She looked up, sensing his panic. "Stephen, darling, you are pacing a hole into the Persian rug. Did the Vulture Fund call again?" "They aren't calling, Ash. They're threatening," Stephen snapped, pacing faster. "I need to liquidate the East Point warehouse complex. It's the only asset unencumbered enough to cover the $5 million in cash." "So, sell it," Ashley said, as if suggesting he order a different vintage of wine. "You're the CEO." "I tried!" Stephen slammed his hand against the glass window. "I had Richard Sterling draft the sale documents this morning, but there's a snag. A massive, archaic snag. Dad bought that specific plot 30 years ago, before he fully incorporated. The deed has a spousal consent clause. I can't liquidate it without my mother's notarized signature." Ashley stopped scrolling. Her perfectly manicured fingers went still. "Then go get her signature. Tell her it's routine corporate restructuring." "Did you see her in Sterling's office?" Stephen laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "She didn't even blink when she got cut out of the fortune. She's angry, Ashley. She's stubborn. If I put a document in front of her right now, she's going to demand to have her own lawyer read it. If a lawyer looks at the company books, they'll see the apex debt. The board will find out, and I'll be removed for gross financial misconduct." Ashley slowly set her phone down on the glass coffee table. She uncrossed her legs, her posture shifting from bored socialite to calculating predator. This was the Ashley that Stephen both relied upon and secretly feared. "If she reads it, we lose," Ashley murmured, her eyes narrowing. "So we make sure she can't read it, legally." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the nuclear option, Stephen," Ashley said smoothly, standing up and walking over to him. She adjusted his silk tie, her voice a soothing, venomous purr. "Your mother is 65. She just lost her husband of 4 decades to a traumatic battle with cancer. She has been isolated in that big house. It's perfectly natural that the grief has taken a toll on her cognitive faculties." Stephen stared at his wife, the realization dawning on him. "Incompetency? You want to declare my mother mentally incompetent?" "I want to save our lifestyle, Stephen," Ashley corrected sharply. "If a medical professional signs an affidavit stating she is suffering from severe cognitive decline and grief-induced dementia, her signature is no longer legally required. As her eldest son and the executor of the visible estate, power of attorney reverts to you. You sign the deed, we pay off Apex, and we move your mother to that lovely facility in Alpharetta, the one with the locked memory care ward, for her own safety. Of course." Stephen hesitated. It was cruel. It was absolute betrayal. But then his phone vibrated again in his pocket. Another phantom countdown from Apex. He swallowed hard. "Who do we use? We can't just take her to a hospital. She'll fight it." Ashley smiled, a thin, chilling curve of her lips. "Leave that to me. I know a concierge psychiatrist who caters to the Buckhead elite. Dr. Silas Thorne. He specializes in discrete family transitions. For a $50,000 consulting fee, Doctor. Thorne will diagnose a lamppost with dementia if you ask him nicely." Gloria Hayes was not surprised when she saw the black Range Rover pull into her circular driveway. She was sitting in her favorite wingback chair in the formal living room, a cup of Earl Grey tea resting on the mahogany side table beside her. She wasn't wearing widow's black today. She wore a tailored emerald green silk blouse and crisp black trousers. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture immaculate. She looked like a woman preparing to chair a board meeting, not a grieving widow. She glanced at the grandfather clock. 2:15 p.m. Exactly on time. 2 hours ago, James Caldwell had called her with an update. "Stephen ordered the sale of the East Point complex, but the title company flagged it for your signature. They are trapped, Gloria. Expect them to make a desperate move today." When the doorbell chimed, Gloria didn't get up. She waited until her housekeeper, Maria, opened the door. Voices echoed in the foyer. Stephen's forced cheerfulness, Ashley's sharp heels clicking on the marble, and a third set of footsteps, heavy and unfamiliar. They walked into the living room without waiting to be announced. Stephen led the charge, holding a leather folio. Ashley was right behind him, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the valuable antiques as if she were already inventorying them for an estate sale. Behind them stood a man in his late 50s, wearing a tweed blazer and wire-rimmed glasses, clutching a medical briefcase. "Mom," Stephen said, projecting an overly loud, patronizing warmth. "I'm so glad we caught you at home. We brought someone to see you." Gloria took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes fixed over the rim of the china cup. She set it down with a soft clink. "This is my home, Stephen. Where else would you catch me? And who is your friend?" "I'm Dr. Silas Thorne, Mrs. Hayes," the man said, stepping forward with a practiced oily smile. He didn't offer his hand. "I'm a specialist in geriatric cognitive wellness. Stephen and Ashley asked me to come by just to do a routine wellness check. The loss of a spouse can be terribly disorienting." "Disorienting?" Gloria repeated flatly. "Yes," Ashley chimed in, stepping closer to Gloria's chair. Her perfume, thick and floral, invaded Gloria's space. "We've been so terribly worried about you, Gloria. You've been so reclusive since the reading of the will. Stephen said you were acting erratic. We just want to make sure your mind is right." The trap was so blatantly obvious, so insulting in its execution, that Gloria actually felt a flicker of pity for Arthur for raising such a fool. "My mind is perfectly fine, Ashley," Gloria said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "But I appreciate your sudden, profound concern for my well-being." Dr. Thorne opened his briefcase, pulling out a clipboard. "Excellent. Then this will only take a moment. Mrs. Hayes, can you tell me what day of the week it is, and who the current president is?" Gloria looked at the man. "I am not going to play your parlor games, Dr. Thorne. If you are here to practice medicine, I suggest you leave before I report your license to the state medical board for attempting an unsolicited coercive diagnosis in a private residence." Thorne's oily smile faltered. He glanced at Stephen nervously. This wasn't the confused, weeping widow he had been promised. Stephen realized the soft approach was failing. The panic from the office returned, sharpening his tone. "Mom, stop being difficult. Dr. Thorne is here for your own good. You need to answer his questions, and then you need to sign these papers." Stephen stepped forward, dropping the leather folio onto Gloria's lap. It fell open, revealing the deed transfer for the East Point complex. "This is a standard operational transfer," Stephen lied, his voice rising in volume. "It's just paperwork Dad forgot to finish. Sign it." "No," Gloria said simply. She didn't even look at the documents. "Gloria, you old fool, you don't have a choice," Ashley spat, the veneer of the concerned daughter-in-law vanishing entirely. Her face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you're so smart sitting here in your mansion, looking down on us. You have nothing. Arthur left you nothing but dust. Stephen is trying to save the company, and you're in the way. Dr. Thorne, just sign the damn affidavit. She's clearly delusional and uncooperative." Thorne hesitated, pen hovering over his clipboard. "Well, extreme paranoia and refusal to cooperate are certainly indicators of cognitive decline." "Sign it," Stephen barked at the doctor. Then he turned back to his mother, his face flushed with rage, looming over her chair. "Mom, I am the CEO. I am the head of this family now. I am not asking you. I am telling you. You are going to sign that deed, or I swear to God, Dr. Thorne is going to have you committed to Willow Creek Memory Center by dinner time." The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. 3 younger, stronger people surrounding a 65-year-old woman, attempting to bully her into signing away her rights and her freedom. Ashley stepped even closer, her eyes flashing toward Gloria's smartphone resting on the side table. "Don't even think about calling Richard Sterling," Ashley hissed, snatching the phone off the table and dropping it into her own designer purse. "You're cut off, Gloria. It's over. Just give up." For a long, terrifying moment, the room was silent. Stephen breathed heavily. Ashley glared victoriously. Dr. Thorne scribbled a fake diagnosis onto his clipboard. And then Gloria Hayes began to laugh. It wasn't a hysterical laugh, nor was it a chuckle. It was a deep, resonant, genuine laugh that bubbled up from her chest. It was the laugh of an apex predator watching mice try to build a trap. Stephen froze. "What is so funny?" Gloria stopped laughing, her eyes locking onto Stephen with an intensity that made him involuntarily take a step back. She reached her hand down the side of her wingback chair, slipping her fingers between the cushion and the armrest. She retrieved a small, black digital dictaphone. The red recording light was blinking steadily. "I find it hilarious, Stephen," Gloria said, her voice dropping an octave, radiating absolute authority, "that you think you are the smartest person in the room." Before Stephen could process the recording device, the heavy oak double doors of the living room swung open. "I believe the lady asked you to leave, Doctor," a booming baritone voice announced. Stephen and Ashley spun around. Standing in the doorway was James Caldwell. He was flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department. Ashley gasped, clutching her purse. Stephen went pale, the blood draining from his face. "Who the hell are you? This is a private family medical matter. Officers, this man is trespassing." "I am James Caldwell, Mrs. Hayes's primary legal counsel," James said, stepping into the room with the smooth, lethal grace of a shark. He didn't look at Stephen. He looked directly at the fake doctor. "And Dr. Thorne, if you put ink to that paper, you will be committing medical fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The APD is here to ensure you find your way back to your car. If I ever see your name on a document involving my client, I will personally ensure you spend the next decade practicing medicine in a federal penitentiary." Thorne dropped the clipboard as if it had caught fire. He practically sprinted past the officers, abandoning his $50,000 payday to save his own skin. Stephen was trembling now. "This is ridiculous. I am the executor. I have the right to order a medical evaluation." "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Hayes," James interrupted smoothly, opening his own leather briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, notarized document with a gold foil seal. "As of 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Hayes executed an ironclad, durable power of attorney for healthcare and financial affairs, assigning myself and a board-certified neurologist at Emory University as her sole proxies. Any medical declaration of incompetency made without our joint, written consent is legally void." James tossed the document onto the coffee table. "Your little coup d'etat was dead before you even walked through the door." Ashley stepped backward, her bravado shattering. "Stephen, what is going on? I don't understand," Stephen stammered, looking from James to his mother. "Mom, you didn't have a lawyer. Dad left you nothing." Sterling said, "Richard Sterling is a glorified paper pusher who handles zoning permits," Gloria said, finally standing up. She smoothed her emerald blouse, appearing 10 feet tall in the center of the room. She picked up the deed transfer from her lap and let it drop onto the floor. "Arthur and I hired James 3 years ago. We hired him the moment I found the Cayman Islands shell accounts you used to steal from our company to buy this little Viper her yacht." Stephen's knees gave out. He collapsed heavily onto the white leather sofa, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Ashley let out a strangled shriek, dropping her purse. You knew about the money?" Stephen whispered. "I know everything, Stephen," Gloria said coldly. She walked over to James, who handed her a thick blue folder. She held it up. "I know about the $5 million you owe Apex Capital. I know they are threatening to liquidate the fleet on Monday. And I know you thought you could throw your own mother into a psychiatric ward to cover your tracks." "Mom, please," Stephen begged, the arrogant CEO completely vanishing, replaced by a terrified, desperate child. "If Apex takes the fleet, the company goes under. Dad's legacy will be destroyed. I have the company, but I don't have the cash. You have to help me." Gloria looked down at her eldest son. There was no warmth left in her gaze, only the icy chill of absolute judgment. "You don't have the company, Stephen," Gloria said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy and confusing. "What?" Stephen breathed. Gloria opened the blue folder. "Hayes Construction and Development is a subsidiary. It is wholly owned by a Delaware statutory trust. A trust created by your father to protect his life's work from a thief. And as of yesterday morning, the sole controlling trustee of that Delaware trust activated her absolute authority." Gloria tossed the folder onto Stephen's lap. The front page boldly displayed her name as the irrevocable owner of the holding company. "You are not the CEO, Stephen. You are an employee of my trust," Gloria declared, her voice ringing out like a judge delivering a sentence. "And as of this exact moment, your employment is terminated. You are fired. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your company car will be towed from the driveway in 10 minutes. Ashley burst into tears, a loud, ugly sound of pure panic. She lunged forward, grabbing Stephen's arm. "Stephen, do something! She can't do this! We'll lose the house! We'll lose everything!" Gloria turned her dark, unyielding gaze onto Ashley. "I suggest you close your mouth, Ashley, before I instruct the officers to arrest you for the theft of my cellular phone." Ashley gasped, hastily pulling the phone from her purse and placing it trembling on the coffee table. She backed away, shrinking into the corners of the room. "Get out," Gloria commanded, pointing a single steady finger toward the front door. "Both of you, get out of my house, and do not come back." Stephen tried to stand, reaching out a trembling hand toward his mother. "Mom, where are we supposed to go? Apex is going to ruin me. They'll take everything I have." "Then I suggest you start packing, mister." "Hayes," James Caldwell said, motioning for the APD officers to step forward, "because trespassing on the property of the Trust's CEO is a remarkably bad way to start your weekend." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Stephen and Ashley were escorted out of the Grand Tudor estate by the police. Gloria stood by the window, watching the black Range Rover speed down the driveway, fleeing like thieves in the daylight. The silence returned to the house, but it was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. James Caldwell stood beside her, respectfully quiet. "A clean victory, Mrs. Hayes. The transfer of corporate control is already filed. Apex Capital will be calling you by morning." "Let them call," Gloria said, turning away from the window. She picked up her Earl Grey tea. It was cold, but it tasted sweeter than victory. "Tomorrow I take back my company, and then James, we go hunting for Daniel." Monday morning arrived in Atlanta with a sudden, violent thunderstorm, the rain lashing against the glass towers of Midtown. Inside the grand lobby of Hayes Enterprise Holdings, however, the real storm was just walking through the revolving doors. Gloria Hayes stepped onto the polished marble floor precisely at 8 a.m. She wore a tailored, charcoal gray, double-breasted suit that spoke of old money and unyielding authority. On her left wrist sat Arthur's vintage gold Rolex, a heavy, ticking reminder of the man who had laid these foundations. She was flanked by James Caldwell and two imposing, silent security contractors. The lobby, usually buzzing with the frantic energy of a new work week, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Whispers died on the lips of junior executives. Baristas at the lobby cafe froze with steaming pitchers in their hands. They all knew Arthur Hayes was dead. They all assumed Stephen Hayes was the new king. Seeing the matriarch, whom most assumed was sitting at home knitting or crying, marching toward the private executive elevator sent a shockwave through the building. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," stammered Big Mike, the head of building security, hastily stepping out from behind his podium. He had worked for Arthur for 20 years. "Good morning, Michael," Gloria replied, her voice calm but carrying effortlessly across the quiet lobby. "I need you to deactivate Stephen and Daniel Hayes' building access cards immediately. If either of them attempts to enter the premises, they are to be escorted out. If they resist, call the police." Big Mike's eyes widened, but 40 years of loyalty to the Hayes name overrode his shock. "Yes, ma'am, right away." The executive floor was a hive of nervous energy. Stephen's executive assistant, Brenda, was frantically typing on her keyboard when the elevator doors chimed open. She looked up, her face pale. "Mrs. Hayes, Stephen isn't answering his phone. We have 3 site managers threatening to walk off the Buckhead project, and the bank is calling." "Breathe, Brenda," Gloria said gently, placing a hand on the young woman's desk. "Stephen is no longer employed by this company. Please find a banker's box and begin packing his personal effects. Then I want you to freeze his corporate credit cards and revoke his signature authority on all operational accounts." Leaving the bewildered assistant behind, Gloria pushed open the heavy oak doors of the CEO's corner office. Stephen had already begun redecorating. The rich, dark wood Arthur favored had been replaced with gaudy, modern chrome and sterile white leather. It smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. "Have maintenance remove this ridiculous furniture by noon," Gloria instructed James Caldwell, taking her place behind the massive glass desk. She didn't sit down. She remained standing, a commander viewing her war room. "Bring in the board." At 9 a.m., the emergency management meeting commenced in the main conference room. 12 senior executives, mostly older white men who had tolerated Arthur but secretly viewed Stephen as an easily manipulated mark, sat around the long mahogany table. They looked impatient and distinctly annoyed to be summoned by the widow. "Gentlemen," Gloria began, standing at the head of the table, "I know the rumor mill is spinning. I will save you the speculation. Arthur Hayes did not leave this company to his sons. He left it to a Delaware statutory trust, of which I am the sole trustee and absolute beneficiary. I own 51% of the voting shares. I am the chairman of the board, and as of this morning, I am the acting chief executive officer." a collective murmur of outrage and disbelief rippled through the room. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hayes," sneered Robert Vance, the chief financial officer who had happily turned a blind eye to Stephen's embezzling. "Running a household is not the same as running a $200 million construction conglomerate. The markets will panic. Our lenders will pull our lines of credit. You have no experience. I kept the ledgers of this company for 20 years before you even knew how to tie a Windsor knot, Robert." Gloria cut him off, her voice cracking like a whip. The silence returned instantly. "I know the exact margin of profit on every cubic yard of concrete we pour. I also know that you signed off on Stephen's fraudulent Cayman Island shell accounts." Robert's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You are fired, Robert. Pack your desk," Gloria commanded, not breaking eye contact. She turned to the rest of the terrified executives. "This company has lost its way. Arthur built this empire on the sweat and blood of the men and women laying bricks in the Georgia heat, not on the financial gymnastics of boys in tailored suits. Effective immediately, all executive bonuses are suspended pending a full forensic audit." She paused, letting the panic set in before delivering the masterstroke. "However, the hourly wages for all site workers, foremen, and administrative staff will increase by 20%, effective today. We are going to secure the loyalty of the people who actually build our buildings. If any of you have a problem with this restructuring, the door is open. Otherwise, get back to work." No one moved. No one breathed a word of protest. In less than 10 minutes, Gloria had decapitated the corrupt leadership, terrified the survivors into submission, and bought the absolute, undying loyalty of the thousands of blue-collar workers who formed the backbone of the company. With the construction arm secured, Gloria returned to her office. Waiting for her alongside James Caldwell was Detective Marcus Miller of the Atlanta PD Vice Squad. "Detective," Gloria said, taking a seat. Her demeanor shifted from corporate raider to a mother facing a heartbreaking necessity. "Let's talk about my youngest son." "Mrs. Hayes," Miller said gently, "Daniel is in deep. The laundering operation out of your commercial strip malls is keeping a very violent cartel afloat in the South Side. If we just arrest him, he'll post bail. The cartel will think he's talking, and they'll put a bullet in his head before he reaches his car." "I know," Gloria said, closing her eyes for a brief moment, fighting back a wave of maternal grief. She had to break her son to save his life. "Which is why we aren't going to arrest him. We are going to suffocate him." She signed a stack of legal injunctions James placed before her. "These orders immediately freeze every commercial property Daniel manages," Gloria explained. "The locks will be changed. The accounts will be seized by the trust. The cartel's laundromats and nail salons will be locked out by noon. Daniel won't have the money or the infrastructure to process their cash." "The cartel will come looking for him immediately," Detective Miller warned. "He'll be a dead man walking." "He will be a terrified man," Gloria corrected, her voice steeling. "When he realizes he is locked out of the properties, when he realizes he has no money, and when the cartel's enforcers start banging on his door, he will have nowhere to run. That is when you approach him, Detective. You offer him a choice: federal witness protection and forced, locked-down rehabilitation in exchange for his full testimony against the cartel, or you leave him to the wolves." It was a ruthless, terrifying gamble, but it was the only way to rip Daniel out of the cartel's grip. "I'll have units positioned outside his condo," Miller promised. "The minute he panics, we'll scoop him up." "Thank you, Detective," Gloria whispered, feeling a sudden heavy exhaustion. Being a queen was easy. Being a mother was agonizing. By Tuesday afternoon, the shockwaves of Gloria's hostile takeover had reached the darkest corners of Atlanta's financial sector. She was reviewing the revised architectural plans for a new affordable housing project, a return to Arthur's roots, when the doors to her office burst open. Big Mike was struggling to hold back 3 men in expensive, aggressively tailored suits. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry. They rushed the elevators." "It's fine, Michael. Let them in," Gloria said calmly, setting her reading glasses on the desk. She knew exactly who they were. The man leading the pack was Trent Vance, a managing partner at Apex Capital. He had the slick, hyper-aggressive energy of a Wall Street predator accustomed to bullying his way to a payday. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, lady," Trent snarled, slamming a thick leather folder onto Gloria's glass desk. "But we are looking for Stephen Hayes. He missed his balloon payment yesterday. As of 9 a.m. this morning, your company is in default. We are executing our mezzanine lien. My guys are already at your equipment yards to seize the fleet. James Caldwell stepped out from the shadows of the corner office, his presence immediately shifting the power dynamic. If your men touch a single bulldozer, Mr. Vance, I will have them arrested for grand theft auto. Trent sneered. We have a signed contract. $5 million, or we take the company's assets. That's the law. Actually, Mr. Vance, let's talk about the law, Gloria said, rising slowly from her chair. She didn't raise her voice, but the sheer gravity of her tone made Trent instinctively step back. Your mezzanine loan was signed by Stephen Hayes in his capacity as CEO of a subsidiary branch. However, the assets he put up as collateral belonged to Hayes Enterprise Holdings, a Delaware trust. Stephen never had the legal authorization from the parent holding company to pledge those assets. Trent's confident smirk faltered. That's impossible. We did our due diligence. We had internal assurances that the liquidity was there and the corporate structure was sound. Ah, yes, your internal assurances, Gloria said, a cold, dangerous smile touching her lips. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a single manila folder. It was pristine, unlike the dusty envelope that had started this war. She tossed it onto the desk. Let's talk about your informant. Trent went utterly rigid. His two associates exchanged nervous glances. When James and I discovered Stephen was bleeding the company dry, we didn't just look at the bank statements. We looked at the data flow, Gloria explained, her voice dropping into a deadly, rhythmic cadence. We hired a cybersecurity firm to audit the executive servers. We found that someone had been secretly downloading proprietary financial data, internal memos, and liquidity reports, and emailing them to a Proton mail address belonging to Apex Capital. You have no proof of that, Trent bluffed, though a bead of sweat had formed on his temple. I don't need to prove it to you. I just need to prove it to the SEC, Gloria countered. She opened the folder, revealing printed emails and offshore banking wire traces. Stephen is a fool, Mr. Vance, but he isn't a traitor. He didn't leak the documents. He didn't know you were using our internal data to deliberately structure a loan he was mathematically guaranteed to default on. Gloria picked up a glossy photograph from the file and slid it across the desk. It showed Trent Vance sitting in a dimly lit VIP booth at an upscale Buckhead lounge. Sitting across from him, sipping a martini and handing him a flash drive, was Ashley Hayes. The silence in the office was so profound you could hear the rain hitting the glass outside. Ashley, Gloria said, spitting the name out like poison. My daughter-in-law. A woman whose greed was so bottomless. Stephen's millions weren't enough. She saw the writing on the wall. She knew Stephen was drowning in his own incompetence. So she made a deal with the devil. Gloria leaned forward, locking eyes with Trent. She fed you the internal data so you could corner Stephen. The plan was simple. You force a default, you swoop in and seize Hayes Construction for pennies on the dollar, and in exchange, Ashley gets a 10% finder's fee deposited into a shell account in the Bahamas. She engineers her husband's complete financial ruin, cashes out with Apex's dirty money, and files for divorce the next day, leaving Stephen with nothing but debts. James Caldwell chuckled darkly. It's textbook corporate espionage, Mr. Vance, paired with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. If I hand this file to the federal prosecutor, you won't just lose your hedge fund, you'll lose your freedom. Trent Vance looked at the photograph of Ashley, then up at the 65-year-old black woman who had just effortlessly dismantled his multi-million-dollar extortion ring. The aggressive finance bro vanished, replaced by a cornered rat. What do you want? Trent asked, his voice hoarse. I want you out of my city, Gloria stated, her voice echoing with the weight of absolute victory. You will tear up the original mezzanine loan agreement right here, right now. James will draft a new, standard corporate loan for the $5 million Stephen borrowed. It will carry a flat 5% interest rate, amortized over 10 years, with no collateral liens attached to my equipment fleet. Trent swallowed hard. My partners will kill me. 5% is a massive loss for us. It's better than 5 to 10 years in federal prison, James Caldwell pointed out helpfully. And as for your arrangement with Ashley, Gloria added, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, righteous fury, you will cancel the offshore transfer. She gets nothing. Not a single red cent. Defeated, Trent Vance pulled a platinum pen from his breast pocket. He signed the restructuring documents James slid in front of him with shaking hands. Without a word, he and his associates turned and fled the office, the predators chased out by the true apex of the jungle. When the doors closed, Gloria finally let out a long, shuddering breath. She sank back into her chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. She had saved the company. She had neutralized the immediate threat. But the victory tasted like ash. Her son had been betrayed in the most intimate, devastating way possible. Ashley hadn't just mocked Gloria. She had systematically plotted to destroy Stephen for a paycheck. "James," Gloria said quietly, her eyes opening, revealing a hardened, sorrowful resolve. "Call Stephen's cell phone. Tell him to meet me at the Ansley Park house tonight. It's time he learns exactly who he married." The thunderstorm that had battered Atlanta all day finally broke, leaving the evening air thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of wet pine and asphalt. Inside the Ansley Park estate, the atmosphere was equally stifling. Gloria sat in her formal living room, the Delaware Trust documents, and the Apex Capital file arranged neatly on the mahogany coffee table in front of her. James Caldwell stood by the unlit fireplace, a silent, imposing sentinel. At precisely 7 p.m., the heavy front doors opened. Stephen walked in, looking like a ghost of the arrogant CEO he had been just a week prior. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes rimmed with the red exhaustion of a man watching his empire crumble. But he wasn't alone. Ashley trailed close behind him, her face a mask of desperate, feral determination. And beside her stood a third figure, Councilman Reginald Davis. Davis was a veteran of Atlanta city politics, a smooth-talking opportunist who had built a career on shaking down developers for campaign contributions in exchange for fast-tracked zoning permits. Gloria raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "I asked for my son, Stephen. I don't recall inviting the city council to my living room." Ashley stepped forward, her voice shrill and laced with venom. She hadn't spoken to Trent Vance yet. She didn't know the Apex deal was already dead. All she knew was that her husband had been locked out of his company, and her offshore payday was slipping through her manicured fingers. "You leave Stephen alone, Gloria," Ashley spat, attempting to project dominance. "We aren't here to beg. We are here to negotiate. Because if you don't step down as CEO and reinstate Stephen immediately, Councilman Davis is going to make sure Hayes Enterprise Holdings never pours another ounce of concrete in this city." Stephen looked bewildered, as if he were merely a passenger in his own life. "Mom," Ashley said she made some calls. She said the councilman could help us mediate this. The company is bleeding. We have to compromise. Councilman Davis offered a slick, practiced politician's smile. "Mrs. Hayes, a pleasure as always. Arthur was a good man. But let's be pragmatic. The city has concerns about this sudden change in corporate leadership. We have active municipal contracts with Hayes Construction. If the stability of those contracts is in question, the City Council has the authority to issue immediate stop work orders. We can freeze your permits, initiate eminent domain inquiries on your undeveloped lots, and tie your trust up in municipal litigation for a decade." Davis leaned forward, planting his hands on the back of a leather chair. "However, if you sign a legally binding agreement to transition operational control back to Stephen, the city will view the company as stabilized. The permits will clear tomorrow morning. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement." It was a blatant, unapologetic shakedown. Ashley looked triumphant, crossing her arms. She believed she had played the ultimate trump card. She believed she had backed the old woman into a corner using the sheer weight of political corruption. Gloria didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Councilman Davis with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "Pragmatism," Gloria echoed softly, testing the word on her tongue. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to the grand portrait of Arthur that hung above the fireplace. She reached behind the heavy gold frame, her fingers finding a concealed biometric scanner built into the wood paneling. The wall clicked, and a small hidden wall safe slid open. "Arthur and I built this company from a single pickup truck and a box of rusty tools in 1980, Gloria said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She withdrew a thick, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't an accounting book. It was black, weather-beaten, and sealed with a brass clasp. "We fought redlining. We fought racist bank managers who wouldn't lend to a black contractor. And unfortunately, we had to fight the endless, insatiable greed of Atlanta's political machine. She walked back to the coffee table and dropped the black ledger with a heavy thud. Arthur built Atlanta, Councilman Davis, Gloria said, her eyes locking onto the politician with terrifying intensity. Did you honestly think he didn't keep the receipts? Davis's slick smile vanished. The color drained from his face as he stared at the black book. Page 42, Gloria said coldly. April 2018. A consulting fee of $200,000 routed through a shell PAC in your brother-in-law's name to secure the zoning variance for the Midtown Tower. Page 67. The all-expenses-paid trip to Dubai for you and your mistress, paid for by the Hayes corporate card, to look the other way on the environmental impact study for the riverfront project. You wouldn't, Davis stammered, his political career flashing before his eyes. That would implicate your own company in federal bribery charges. James Caldwell stepped forward, his deep voice slicing through the politician's panic. Actually, Councilman, as part of our corporate restructuring, Hayes Enterprise Holdings is preparing to voluntarily disclose past executive misconduct to the Department of Justice in exchange for corporate immunity. Mrs. Hayes is cleaning house. The DOJ is going to be very, very interested in this ledger. You have exactly 30 seconds to leave my house, Reginald, Gloria commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. And if you ever breathe the name Hayes in a city council meeting again, I will personally hand-deliver this book to the FBI field office. Davis didn't say a word. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted for the front door, abandoning Stephen and Ashley without a backward glance. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ashley's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. Her political trump card had just evaporated into thin air. Stephen looked from the door, to the black book, and finally to his mother. He looked utterly broken. Mom, why? Why is Ashley doing this? Why did she bring him here to threaten you? Gloria felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had shielded her sons from the ugly realities of the world for so long that they had forgotten how to recognize a snake in their own grass. She picked up the pristine manila folder from the coffee table, the Apex Capital file. Because, Stephen, Gloria said softly, her anger giving way to a profound sadness for her firstborn. Your wife isn't trying to save your company. She's trying to trigger a parachute. She handed the folder to Stephen. He opened it, his hands shaking as he looked at the printed emails, the offshore wire traces, and finally, the photograph of Ashley sitting with Trent Vance at the VIP lounge. What is this? Stephen whispered, the words catching in his throat. It's the ultimate betrayal, son, Gloria said. Ashley fed our internal financial data to Apex Capital. She orchestrated your default. Apex was going to seize your fleet, bankrupt you, and pay her a 10% finder's fee into a Bahamian account. She was going to take the money and file for divorce before the ink on your bankruptcy papers was even dry. Stephen stared at the photograph. The world he knew, the illusion of his perfect marriage, his perfect life, his perfect control, shattered into a million jagged pieces. He slowly turned to look at his wife. Ashley, he choked out, tell me this is a lie. Tell me she's making this up. Ashley looked at the photographic evidence, then at Stephen's broken face, and finally at Gloria. The facade of the terrified, supportive wife melted away entirely. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh, crossing her arms over her chest. Look at you, Stephen, Ashley sneered, dropping the sweet Southern Belle act completely. You're pathetic. You thought you were Arthur Hayes 2.0? You're nothing but a spoiled rich kid playing dress-up in your daddy's office. You were going to lose the company anyway. I just decided to cash out before the ship sank. Stephen stepped back, physically recoiling as if she had struck him across the face. I gave you everything, he whispered. You gave me a lifestyle, she corrected coldly. And the moment you couldn't afford it anymore, you became useless to me. Enough! Gloria's voice cracked like thunder in the room. She turned to James Caldwell, who pulled a document from his briefcase. This is a marital dissolution agreement, Ashley, James said, handing her a pen. You will sign it. You are walking away from this marriage with the clothes on your back, your leased car, and absolutely zero claim to Stephen's assets, alimony, or the Hayes Trust. If you contest this in court, the Apex espionage file goes straight to the federal prosecutor, and you will spend the next 10 years wearing a jumpsuit that doesn't match your handbag. Ashley looked at the divorce papers. She looked at James's unyielding expression and Gloria's icy stare. She knew she had lost. With a venomous scoff, she snatched the pen, scrawled her signature across the bottom of the page, and threw the pen on the floor. "You can keep your broke son, Gloria," Ashley spat. She turned and strutted out of the house, the heavy front door slamming shut behind her. Stephen collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. Great heaving sobs racked his body. He had lost his father, his company, his wealth, and his wife, all in the span of a week. Gloria walked over and sat beside him. She didn't hug him, but she placed a firm, grounding hand on his shoulder. "I have nothing, Mom," Stephen cried, his tears soaking his hands. "I'm ruined. I'm a failure." "You are stripped bare, Stephen," Gloria corrected gently, but firmly. "Arthur and I gave you a crown you never earned, and it almost destroyed you. I took the company away to save it, but I exposed Ashley to save you." Stephen looked up, his eyes bloodshot and lost. "What do I do now?" "You learn how to be a man," Gloria stated. "I have restructured the Apex debt. The company is secure, but you are not returning to the executive floor. On Monday morning, you will report to the foreman at the East Point development. You are going to put on a hard hat, and you are going to carry bricks, pour concrete, and sweep drywall dust. You will earn a laborer's wage until you have paid back every single dime you stole from the Cayman shell accounts." Stephen stared at her, horrified. "A laborer? Mom, the crews know me. The humiliation." "The humiliation is the medicine you need," Gloria said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You will learn the value of $1. You will learn the names of the men whose lives you gambled with. And if you prove that you have Arthur's blood in your veins, if you prove you can be a man of honor, then and only then will we discuss your future in the Hayes family." Stephen looked down at his soft, manicured hands. He slowly nodded. It was a brutal sentence, but deep down, he knew it was the only path to redemption. At that moment, the phone in James Caldwell's pocket buzzed. He answered it, stepping away for a moment. When he returned, his expression was solemn, but relieved. "That was Detective Miller, Gloria," James reported softly. "Daniel's commercial properties were frozen this morning. Just as you predicted, the cartel enforcers showed up at his condo 2 hours ago. He panicked and ran right into the arms of the APD unit stationed outside. He has agreed to testify against the cartel in exchange for federal protection. He's being transferred to a locked, secure rehabilitation facility in Virginia tonight." Gloria closed her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The tears she had held back since Arthur's funeral finally spilled over her lashes, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. Her youngest boy was going to face hell in rehab, and he would never be able to live in Atlanta again. But he was alive. He was safe. She opened her eyes, wiping the tears away with a steady hand. The war was over. The poison had been drawn from the wound. "Thank you, James," Gloria whispered. "We're done here." 1 year later, the crystal chandeliers of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens Grand Ballroom glittered like diamonds, casting a warm glow over 300 of the city's most influential philanthropists, politicians, and business leaders. But tonight, they weren't gathered to celebrate a new skyscraper or a political campaign. They were there for the inaugural gala of the Arthur and Gloria Hayes Foundation for Senior Women. Gloria stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd. At 66, she radiated a breathtaking, sovereign power. She wore a regal, deep purple gown, her silver hair styled impeccably. She was no longer the invisible wife standing in the shadow of a great man. She was the sun around which her new world orbited. "For too long," Gloria's voice rang clear and strong over the microphone, "society has treated older women as invisible, as relics of the past, as burdens to be managed, or worse, silenced. This foundation exists to provide legal protection, financial independence, and a voice to the women who spent their lives building the foundations of our communities, only to be cast aside." The ballroom erupted in a standing ovation. Looking out into the crowd, Gloria's eyes found a table near the back. Sitting there, clapping louder than anyone else, was Stephen. His bespoke suits were gone, replaced by a simple off-the-rack jacket. His hands were calloused, scarred from a year of tying rebar and hauling lumber, but his eyes were clear, bright, and filled with a profound, unshakable respect for his mother. He had earned his foreman's hard hat 3 months ago, and he had never looked happier. Next to him was an empty chair, held in honor of Daniel. Daniel was still in Virginia, living under a new name. He had been sober for 11 months. In his last letter, he told her he was learning to paint again, finding the artist he had buried beneath the drugs and the pressure of the Hayes legacy. When the applause finally died down, Gloria concluded her speech. "We are not defined by the dust we are handed," she said, a knowing smile touching her lips. "We are defined by what we choose to build with it." Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the ballroom was dark, Gloria returned to the quiet sanctuary of the Ansley Park estate. She walked into her study, the room that used to belong entirely to Arthur. It was hers now. On her massive oak desk, framed in sleek glass, sat the faded yellowed manila envelope, the drywall dust forever preserved inside. Gloria reached out and gently touched the glass. She thought of Arthur, of his brilliance, his quiet love, and his final masterful game of chess. He had given her the weapons, but she was the one who had fought the war. She had saved their legacy, redeemed their sons, and finally, miraculously, found herself. She turned off the desk lamp, leaving the envelope in the moonlight, and walked out of the room, her head held high. The Queen had claimed her throne, and her reign had just begun.